So, we are going to be picking up here with our third and final day, discussing the absolute monarchs. Once we get this going here. Yesterday we left off. Hello. Yesterday we left off with the French monarchs, Louis XIV and Louis XV. Well, how would you sum up Louis XIV, excuse me. How would you sum up Louis XIV?
Absolute.
Okay, absolute, even though our textbook says he's not so much. How many of you are in camp? Yes, Mr. Absolute Monarch. He is absolute, no matter what the textbook says. Okay, why?
Built the thing.
Well, the book says
Versailles. Built the Palace of Versailles.
I think he was able to, like, even though it didn't appear like he had control, he was, because he had the nobles under his influence. I think that was most important. And he made them feel like they had power, but they really didn't. So he was ultimately in control of it all.
Okay, he made the nobles feel like they had power, but really didn't, and so things, yeah, good summing up. I like it. Yeah.
he had all this parlement, but he was really in charge of all the parlement.
Right, he had his regional governments, the parlement, but he made them feel important. Again, he was really good at making people feel important, but in the end, maybe he's not so much. Yes, ma'am.
I think another big part was that he was in complete control, and also that he was hands-on. So he had the power, but he also, I guess, capitalized off of that.
Correct. Yes, he had the power. But he knew how to also delegate. He knew how to, keep his his fingers in all the pies, so to say. But he wasn't, in complete and total control all the time. Remember, if he couldn't be at a meeting, what did he do?
Painting.
Here's my painting. Watch. Look at me stand here in my robes of excellence and my lovely tights with my padded calves so that my legs look shapely. Because what man doesn't want to look shapely? So he rules for over 70 years because he does come to the throne at the age of 4. And because of the Fronde, the issues before or while he was a young man, a very young man, like a child, in charge of the country, he isn't overly trusting, and so he does things in order to make sure that he's always in power, which of course the number one thing is the building of Versailles.
Yeah, but then he made that mistake by listening to his mistress and then
Right.
their whole religious thing in here.
Yeah, let's talk about that, the Edict of Fontainebleau, where he listened to his mistress turned wife, one of the few mistresses that actually, get bumped up to permanent role of wife. And she's like, no, you must not let these Protestants be okay. You must get rid of them. And so he took away Henri IV's Edict of Nantes and made that very difficult for Protestants to live. And so the middle class artisans and shopkeepers and everybody else left France, which made them very culturally not diverse.
Yeah.
I don't know what a word for not diverse is, but culturally not diverse. Monotonous. I like it. So that, he has his ups and downs. He's definitely not like the be-all, end-all of life because he does make some mistakes, but he doesn't always see them as mistakes. And he's a weak ruler in the sense that it didn't matter how much money he spent. If he wanted to build this castle, he was going to build the he's going to build the Palace of Versailles come heck or high water. So I'm going to knock something over. So that kind of startled me a little bit. Oh my gosh, who's here? Hello.
Hey.
Welcome back. I made a bigger mess. Just stop, Fosters. Okay, so we pick up then with Louis XV. That's this studly man right here, the son of the great-grandson of Louis XIV. And what's his deal? What's he well known for? What's Louis XV's claim to fame? What does he do? One big thing that we were like, really? That was really dumb.
The
Yes, ma'am.
Parliament is being spelled?
That's the Duke of Orleans. Yep.
Is the Mississippi bubble thing?
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah. Yes. What?
wasn't that the region? Who did that?
For him, like he was king because he was such a young man, but his regent pulled this shenanigans of the Mississippi bubble. And what happened then? What did that do in the end to France? What was the impact of the Mississippi bubble?
They made like a bunch of money, like paper money that had like no value to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so then like, I guess, wouldn't that cause inflation?
Yes. If you're just printing money and you have no gold in the bank, okay, because you need to have something to back up the paper money, otherwise the paper money has no value, has no worth. If there's nothing in there, then we have issue. And so they're just, John Law, John Law, prints all this money so that they can buy land, so that they can do work in the Mississippi Valley, because this is when we're starting to gain that area that we know of as the Louisiana Purchase. They're claiming, planting their flag, imperialization over there. And they print all this paper money. All of a sudden people realize that they make a run on the banks. They hand out as much gold as they can to counteract the balance of the dollar. But once that is done, the banks close their doors, lock their windows, and everybody else is left out in the cold with paper money that it's not even valuable enough to burn. So we've issued that. It makes the monarchy in France get another major crack. They didn't have the money to begin with because Louis had spent so much building Versailles that now they're in a real financial pickle, and France is left to its descendants as a financially weak and governmentally weak country because too much control had been put on the nobles, and they're starting to get upset about it. So that's going to lead us into trouble with the French Revolution coming up. So now, switching gears, we're going to go to Central Europe. We have Poland. Now, Poland isn't really Poland per se. It's part of the Holy Roman Empire and the Austrian Habsburg Empire. We're back to the Habsburg family again. So we have Poland just facing issue. There's no strong central authority. There's no one monarch, king, duke, anybody that can really lead the charge for Poland. And most Polish monarchs were foreigners. They weren't Polish born. So if you're not Polish born, you don't really care. It's kind of like King George I in England. He's like, I'm German. I don't care what's going on in England. I'm only brought here because I have to be here. And so they had this central legislative body called the Sejm. Sejm? Oh. Okay. Well, can we call it a diet? Because we know the diet. A meeting of people. The Polish word is Sejm. Whatever this is. But it didn't have any power. Because as any single veto could stop it. Like, whatever they said, if somebody brought up this practice where the staunch opposition of any single member, if there's one member out of the diet that's like, no, I don't like it, then it's all over.
Wow.
Yeah, so that there's power there. One person says, nope, not happening. Okay, the whole plan is done. They don't negotiate around it. They can't get a majority vote. None of it. It's just done. So it's very ineffective for this idea. Such opposition, termed exploding the diet, was most often the work of a group of dissatisfied nobles rather than one person. So you have a group of crabby nobles who are like, I don't want it this way. And so they put the kibosh on the whole deal. Poland, because they have no central legislative body, they have nobody there to make sure that they at least stay relevant and strong, they disappears from the map in the 18th century. People take them over because it's so easy. They can't come to a vote. They can't decide on anything. And so they just get swallowed up by other areas. And there's no more Poland. So the poor Polish people, there are people there Not the important members of the Diet, but just your regular basic Joe and Jane who are like, well, but I'm Polish. No, you're not. No, you're Habsburg. Now you're Hohenzollern. Now you're this. Now you're that. They're like, but I just want to be Polish. Let me be Polish and do my Polish things. But not so much. So poor Poland. They have a rough history. I had a student one time who he was on, this was when I first started teaching, he was on the autism spectrum, and he was Polish, and he was very proud of his Polish heritage, and he read this like 700-page book of like the history of Poland, and he just sucked it in because he was so fascinated by it, and every day I got like Polish fact of the day. And I was like, fascinating. He's like, well, because you're Polish, Miss V. I'm like, not one drop. But that's what amuses you, my little friend, then I will be Polish for you so you can share your heritage with me, the Irish, German, Bohemian lady. So whatever floats your boat, buddy. He was a nice boy. He also gave me a hug every day on the way out the door. Have a good day. Aww. We shall hug. Okay, I'll hug you. So this is a lovely picture of the Ottomans. The Ottoman Empire, they're the Turks. They're coming from modern-day Turkey, and they go in and they invade Vienna. However, only the Polish, see, the Polish get a bad rap, but the Polish come in and they invade the area and they're like, stop Ottomans. And they do, and the only thing that saved the Habsburg Vienna Empire from the Turks taking over are the Polish underneath the leadership of King John Sobieski. Isn't that wonderful? So for all of us who are Polish, how many Polish people do I have here? All right. One.
I don't know one that's from Poland, though.
What? Oh, well,
And they actually live on a road called Sobieski Road.
Really?
Yep.
There's a large Polish settlement a little bit north of Green Bay called Sobieski as well.
Oh, yeah.
It's out by the new zoo. Tidbit. So this is a picture of the saving of the city of Vienna. Very dramatic. I mean, look at the fighting. Look at this guy. He's like being knocked backwards off his horse. That is some impressive fighting skills to like be dramatically falling off your horse and still like look like you're trying to fight. So good job, guy. Okay, so then we have the Pragmatic Sanction in the Habsburg Empire. Now remember, the Habsburgs come about in Europe because of Ferdinand and Isabella and their descendant, Charles V, who, yes?
The book people made this PowerPoint, right?
Yes.
They're very inconsistent with their spelling. In the PowerPoint it's H-A-P and in the book it's H-A-B. Is it V?
It can go either way in history. I've seen it spelled in texts both ways.
Okay. That's going to bother me.
Normally, historians just kind of pick away and stick with it, but yeah. Yeah, the book did not.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree, because I don't know why they would, I don't know. I learned to spell it this way, and so when I write things, I spell it that way, but then the book normally spells it with a B. I don't know. I'm sorry. It is frustrating. So, the Habsburgs held on to the title of the Holy Roman Emperor. Remember who was our first Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor? Charles V, who was also? Yes, pretzel eater in the back, or whatever you're munching on there. Pretzels, good choice. Yes, I got it. Comes from 7 years of understanding young kids who are like, okay, good. Troy's like, what did they just say? She needs milk and she needs to go to the bathroom. Really? That's what she just said? Yeah. Oh, who knew? So, yeah, Charles the First. I'm now eating a pretzel. Charles the First is Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, Habsburg descendant of Ferdinand and Isabella. All this connection, huzzah, huzzah. But they held on to this title, but the title depended on help from many other German states and principalities because so many of these areas really didn't see themselves, as we've talked about, as being part of the empire. They saw themselves as being Saxon or as being other German principalities and not seeing themselves as the empire. to maintain the title of Holy Roman Empire, they have to have the support of these German princes as part of that diet, or as the golden bull that gets them elected. Okay, so they have to maintain that support, and that support is shaky at best because there is no real unifying force in the HRE other than the fact that they belong to the HRE and can go all the way back to the golden bull. So there's a lot of tension because it's very culturally diverse, it's very geographically diverse, it's in Germany, it's out of Germany, it's modern day Austria, it's modern day Czechoslovakia, it's all of these areas, and you can't clump them together as one big nationalized country like you can France or England or Spain. And so it's very hard for the HRE to unite. HRE, of course, is Holy Roman Empire. But we have to have an emperor. We have to have a leader. And of course, this is determined by primogeniture, the inheritance by the oldest male child. But again, one of the common themes of history at this time is we can't have babies. So we run into an issue here, especially male babies. The empire, though, like we have some Habsburg leaders, Leopold I, a great name, Leopold I, Joseph I, and Charles VI. They expand the empire and they do a really great job. But Charles VI does not have a baby boy. And there's issue there. What are we going to do without a baby boy? He has a daughter, though, named Maria Theresa. And he's like, well, this is my best option. It's either stay in our direct family line with Maria Theresa, or we have to go to one of those distant cousins. And then, as we know, that's when trouble abounds. So he wants to keep it in his family line. He's raised Maria Theresa to be the leader. She's well educated. She understands the challenges of having so much culture, so much geography, so many different kinds of people, that she's prepared. She's not walking into this going, well, I know how to dance and embroider, and hopefully I can make babies. So she's prepared. She's educated. She's ready to go. So he asks, and he devotes most of his reign, like this is his main focus, is getting his daughter on the throne. Screw everything else. He just wants his daughter to take over. So he convinces the rest of the Habsburg dynasty, or the inheritance within the Habsburg dynasty, falls to the Pragmatic Sanction. And the Pragmatic Sanction is a document that had to be agreed on by his family, his estates, and other members of the royal diet. Other members that make up the Golden Bull. And this is very difficult for them to do because it's a girl. Other members of the Habsburg family recognized her as the rightful heir. They had different concessions granted by Charles where they said she cannot be empress alone. She has to be married to get the title of empress, but she can be the leader of the Habsburg family, and all these other stipulations. If they give those stipulations over, then they will sign the Pragmatic Sanction. So he jumps through all these hoops, breaks out all this red tape, and eventually gets his daughter Maria Theresa in charge. However, there's one guy who agrees to it and then says, I don't like this idea. She's a female. We have issue. And he is Frederick of Prussia. He invades the Habsburg Empire and puts Maria Theresa at risk in 1740. Because Prussia and the Hohenzollerns do not like Maria Theresa and the Habsburgs. This is Hatfields and McCoys at its finest in Central Europe. Sharks and Jets. Two other groups that don't like each other. I don't know who else. But they don't like each other at all. And so they go up and they fight each other. They have this war. And so if we look at this map here, on page 192, this is looking at the Austrian Habsburg Empire from 1521 to 1772. It had three main sections: Austria, Bohemia, and Hungary, as you can see there. Expansion was mainly moving eastward into Hungary because, why wouldn't they go west? Looking at the map, why wouldn't you go west to take over land? It's France, and nobody wants to go up against Louis. He's a little scary, and his descendants. So they move east because the people on the east are easier to take over. Not a strong centralized government, more familial in organization, and so we can just easily swallow these people up. And they go all the way to the Ottomans, like from Eastern Hungary to the Ottoman Empire in the 17th century, in Galicia from Poland in 1772. They're gaining land. Meanwhile, however, the area of Silesia was lost after 1740. So even though they lost this very rich, very important land, which is in Silesia is the the dark green. Sorry, I can read. Dark green area. They lose that to Prussia. Very rich, very wealthy land. They lose it, but part of the agreement is that they get to keep the title of the Holy Roman Emperor. So that's important. They'll trade land for title, which I find interesting. So here's Silesia. Everything else stays to be the HRE. This is what she is in control of, because she loses this land to Prussia. Thank you. So Prussia, we have a couple different groups here under the Hohenzollern. That's Hohenzollern up there. Isn't that a fun last name? What's your last name? Hohenzollern. Oh, good one. We have Frederick William the Great Elector. He's kind of the start of the Hohenzollern family, the start of the Prussian leadership. He wanted to build an army. The Prussians had no military, and he realized that we need a military in order to make this thing go. So he raises funds, raises taxes, does whatever he can to get an army. And the Junkers, in return for obedience to Frederick and allowing him, and that's Junkers, not Junkers. The J is pronounced as a Y sound. Junkers. The German noble landlords, members of his Diet, members of his group, say, fine, you can have your taxes, you can do whatever you want, you can steamroll us, that's great, but we can enforce serfdom. We can force peasants to be tied to the land forever and lose their freedom to farm for themselves and lose their freedom to do everything. And he's like, fair enough, trade. And the poor peasants are like, huh? We were kind of free. We could at least move around. We could get out of the farm and try our hand in the cities. Now we're stuck. Hate you, Frederick. Dumb. So, therefore, the army and the elector became powerful allies because he was not in direct control. He was kind of like commander-in-chief, like the president is, where he's in control, but he's not really in control. And so they made an ally, and things were friendly between the two of them. The Junkers are like, we're good because we're making money from our peasants. So if you need cannon fodder for your army, random foot soldiers, here's some peasants, because we can control them now and tell them, go fight. I don't want to fight. I have a corn crop to come in. You go fight. Says the German peasants. Frederick William. They also cannot pick a new name in the family. They like their name. And so we have Frederick William, and then we have William the First. And William.
I don't like these.
No. No. So you have Frederick William the Great Elector. He's the first Hohenzollern major domo. Okay? Then he has a son, William the First. Okay? And William the First kind of teams up with the Habsburgs to fight the War of Spanish Succession against Spain, or against France. Remember that? France wants to get his grandson on the throne of Spain. And so the Habsburgs of Spain and their cousins in Austria fight together against France.
They lose, right?
They lose. Well, it's kind of a stalemate because they get to keep their land, but the French guy gets to be on the throne. Messy, messy. So he helps the Spanish Habsburgs, not his own not like all the Habsburgs, but he helps mainly the Spanish Habsburgs in the War of Spanish Succession, and he names himself King of Prussia. Because why won't you? Why wouldn't you name yourself King of Prussia? And then we have William's son, Frederick William the First, who is different from Frederick William the Great Elector.
Why do they do that?
I don't know. I wasn't there. Just to confuse the history students worldwide forever and ever. Amen.
Wait, so there's 4 separate guys up there, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Frederick William, then William the First, then Frederick William the First, and then Frederick II, who also is known as Frederick the Great. So if you see Frederick II, that's also Frederick the Great. If you say Frederick the Great, that's Frederick II.
But not the Great Elector.
Not the Great Elector.
The Great Elector is the one on top of the screen.
Yes. Okay, let's all in the corner of something write this down like this. Okay? Frederick William the Great Elector. Write that. Okay? And then make a down arrow. I know. First time I taught this in Western history, I'm like, I had charts and like big things. Yeah. So we got Frederick William the Great Elector. Down arrow and then put William the First. And then a down arrow. And then Frederick William the First. And then a down arrow. And then Frederick the Second. And then in parentheses write Frederick the Great. So you got Freddie Bill the Great Elector. Billy 1. Freddie Bill 2. Freddie Bill 1. Freddie 2. Don't you wish the next name was named like Joshua or something like, or
What about like Sam?
yeah, or something really Ezekiel. What? Okay, we'll throw something just a little different out there. So Frederick William the First, what he does is he's the most successful of the Prussian leaders because he takes the great army that his grandpa, his namesake, builds and makes it even bigger. So this is the start of Prussia, which is eventually going to be the basis for Germany. Yes, ma'am.
In the book it says Frederick William the Great Elector.
Mm-hmm.
His son was named Frederick the First.
Why did you have to do that? All right.
It's like on the third paragraph or third paragraph.
Oh, hold on. They have a typo. We even got a reaction from most of the silent four in the back row. Like, I can't. Cross out William and it's Frederick. Who checks this?
Wait, then what? No, what?
Yeah, they also
Is there no William then?
No, not William the First, Frederick the First.
What about the other?
Oh, then it's
Fred.
Frederick the Second, because there was never a Frederick first. There's no William.
There is no William?
Okay. Okay, here we go. So we have Frederick William. Okay? His next in line is Frederick the First, not William. And I have to make a note of that. Now that we're doing this, I remember this from last semester, and I'm like, that's right. But I can't go in and change it because it's uneditable.
You can get around.
Done it.
Loophole. There's stuff online that you can use to like uncrack a file.
I may have to do that on my home computer.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah.
So first it's Frederick.
I'm not really going to do that,
the Great
internet.
Elector, then Frederick the First.
What?
Frederick William the Great Elector, then Frederick the First.
Then Frederick the First, Freddie 1, then Freddie Bill 1, then Freddie 2 / Freddie the Great.
So there's no Will at all.
No Will. No Billy.
First one, there's no William.
This is not him. That's not his name. His name is Frederick.
His name is just Frederick.
Frederick the First.
Okay.
And he's the least of the Prussians. He really liked Louis XIV. And so he copied everything Louis XIV did. Like the Great Palace, everything else. He's the least, like how did they describe him here? The least Prussian. He built palaces, patronized the arts, lived luxuriously. Like Versailles, only east. And so then we get, and that's why he calls himself King of Prussia, because it's fancy. Okay, now this is all coming back to me, because I had to read about these guys last time to get this all correct. That's why he calls himself King of Prussia. Then Freddie William comes into play, Frederick William I, and he's like, you know what? My dad was a nut. I'm building this back up. We're bringing Prussia back. And so And we're bringing everybody back. Justin Timberlake should just be in here and just sing to us all the. Wouldn't that be great? I'd get him an easy. But it works. We're bringing everything back. So, Frederick William I is like, forget my dad. He was too fancy. And I'm going to build up this military. Oh. So he builds up this military. His son, Frederick the Great, inherits this great military. He's like, well, I got to do something with this military. I'm going to go fight Maria Theresa over the Pragmatic Sanction.
Wait, that was Frederick William that did that? Or it was the...
Frederick William built the military. Frederick II used it against Maria Theresa.
Also known as the Great.
Also is known as the Great. Freddie II is the Great.
Why is he the Great?
Why couldn't they find other words? Like, the cool.
Why is he
The awesome dude.
Or like
The Nito Badito.
the fantastic.
Yeah, Frederick the Fantastic.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. Well, in the medieval age, I just read something about for my class on my paper that is going to be finished tonight, so we may have treats in class tomorrow. I'm not really sure. About a middle-class guy who had his wife had a baby that wasn't his. And he found out about it in the birthing room, because that's what my paper is all about, the men's roles in a birthing room. And his name was Odo the... Oh, crud, now what was it? Odo the Angry or something like that. And I'm like, that's his, like, that's how people knew him in the village. Is like, Odo, oh yeah, the angry one. You know, like, they used to have really fun titles. Now we just stick with the Great. There was, like, Louis the German. Oh, no. Philip the German, I one time learned about. I learned about Louis the Bald, who was one of the grandsons of Charlemagne. Louis the German, Philip the Bald. And then their other son was named Lothair. It's like, well, he didn't even get a title. Like, he's just Lothair. And then you've got Charles the Bald and Louis the German hanging out, too. So, yeah. It's kind of crazy. Okay, so Frederick William I. He was both the most eccentric monarch to rule the Hohenzollern domains and one of the most effective. He organized the government along military lines. Lots of discipline to the army. Prussian military grew from about 39,000 to 80,000 in the matter of 20 years. Made it the third or fourth largest army in Europe. Textbook, we're not sure, so we'll just throw both in there. So, yeah, they had separate laws that applied to the army and some that applied to civilians. He just made it a real military state. Military priorities and values dominated Prussian government, society, and daily life. And the military became one of the biggest things. Even though he built this really great army, he didn't want to use it. He just wanted it to be there in case. And so he avoided conflict. Its army was a symbol of Prussian power and unity, but not an instrument for foreign invasion and adventures. So then he passed this, when he died in 1740, his son Frederick II, later known as Frederick the Great, he gave him this superb military machine, but not the wisdom to refrain from using it. Yeah, he's like, I got it. Let's run with this military. And they ran fast and far. They almost immediately on coming to the throne, Frederick II upset the Pragmatic Sanction and invaded Silesia. He thus crystallized the Austro-Prussian rivalry for the control of Germany, and that would dominate Central European affairs for over a century. Back a little bit to Maria Theresa. She's dealing with a lot of issues here. One, she's dealing with being the leader, the Holy Roman Empress. She has so many different lands, so many different cultures, so many different people that it was very hard for her to rule. She also was a baby-making machine. She had like 16 kids in like 18 or 19 years. It is incredible. Those numbers may be off, but I'm not off by far. Somebody Wikipedia her because it'll have her like descendants. She's got kids coming out of her kids. Like, it is crazy. And she marries all of her kids off to other leaders of Europe, creating this huge dynasty that all traces back to Mama Maria Theresa. And her youngest child actually is Marie Antoinette, that she marries her off to the King of France. She eventually loses her head in the French Revolution. Aww. Yeah. So we don't we remember her as this baby making machine. We remember her also as just struggling to, one, maintain pregnancies, and two, while dealing with all of these children, that she was also a very hands-on mom. It wasn't like one of those oh yeah, I had a baby and now you're going to go live at this different castle and be raised there and I'll see you at Christmas time, check you later. She lived with all of her kids and they all stayed near her, and she nursed, which was very strange for women at this time. She's like, why wouldn't I? I have the ability, so I will. And that was very strange, not only for just women in general, but a monarch. She shouldn't have been doing that, but she did. But her legacy, foreign policy, is marrying her children off to whoever. Yes?
Who was she married to?
She married...
Yes, 16 children.
16 kids? Okay. Who did she marry? Francis the First of who?
It's just
Frankfurt.
Roman.
Of who?
King in Germany of Frankfurt.
Okay. So he's the prince, the king of Frankfurt area of Germany, part of the HRE. So she didn't marry a foreign dynasty power. She married from home. And he was just kind of their name only. Yeah, you're the emperor because I need to have one to be empress, but she held the power. She made the decisions because she inherited the throne, and that was part of the pragmatic sanction. What?
There's Maria Johanna, Maria Josephina, Maria Carolina, Maria Antonia, Maria Carolina, Maria Amelia,
Yeah.
Maria Elizabeth.
Yeah, she named it, because in honor, and I remember reading about this one time too, in honor of the Blessed Virgin Mary. It's the version of Mary, but then they just called them by their middle name. Hey Antoinette, not Marie Antoinette, or Maria Carolina, which there were two because one died and they named the next daughter that came out after her.
Oh.
Yeah. So, okay. So that's the Hohenzollerns. This is a map on page 194, and this is showing how Prussia grew with all the expansion of all the Fredericks. Frederick William the Great Elector, Frederick the First, Frederick William the Second, no, Frederick William the First, and Frederick the Second / Frederick the Great. That's our order. And so we can see the growth over time and how it really wasn't a whole lot to begin with, just the area around Berlin, and then they take over land, and all of a sudden, boom! By the mid to late 1700s, we can see that they have taken over a ton of land, making themselves a real power to be reckoned with, and a scary thing to go up against the Southern Habsburgs in Austria. Okay, so now we're going to talk Russia. Moving. Do we need a mental deep breath for a minute?
Russia had a funny line in the text.
Headstrong, to say the least.
Yeah, to say the least. That's right. Headstrong, to say the least. Who was that again?
They talk about Charles the 12th.
Charles. Oh, yes. Yes, there it is. Headstrong, to say the least, and perhaps insane. Perhaps. We don't know, but we'll find out. So, the Romanov dynasty. This is the major family tree of Russia. They are in charge up until the Russian Revolution with Anastasia, that whole cartoon. She's the end of the Romanov dynasty. Her parents are the last Romanov leaders. Okay? So this is where we start that family. Here we go. A 17-year-old boy named Michael Romanov takes the throne. And they had been, previously Russia had been considered part of Europe only by courtesy. They're kind of part of us, but they're kind of big, and they kind of go all over the place, and they're kind of far away from anybody else, so, yeah, I guess. But once you were in Russia, you didn't really leave Russia because it was so big.
Wait, so if Maria, if she had troubles handling like the Holy Roman Empire, like how did they like control Russia? Like that's huge.
Serfs.
Okay.
To boil it down to one simple word, they kept peasantry around till World War I.
Yeah.
So when you keep the people down, well, eventually they're going to act up and revolt. But yeah, serfs. Life sucked in Russia, and then it sucked once communism came in, because they kept peasantry basically, but they didn't call it that. Okay, so we have Michael coming into play. They did not have, before 1673, there were no ambassadors to Western Europe. They had diplomatic missions in the 15th century, but really they were too far away geographically and politically and lay on the periphery. They were just kind of backwards forever. They never really modernized. They needed somebody to come in and really clean up their act, which is what we're going to see here. So we have Ivan the Terrible. He was around during the Elizabethan age in England, so we're going back to that point. At one point, they wanted to match up Elizabeth with Ivan and make this great British-Russian connection, but he deserves the name Terrible for a reason. He was awful. He really enjoyed torturing people. Like, a lot. And he had two of his favorite. I took a Russian history class in high school, and I'll never forget this lecture because my professor, or he wasn't a professor, he was a teacher, stood maybe about 5'2", and he always wore three-piece suits, like suit coat, matching vest, matching pants. But it wasn't like a black suit or a gray suit. He had a pink suit. He had a baby blue suit. And his shoes were always patent leather, matching the color of the suit. So he had pink, and he had Einstein white hair and a very full white mustache. And he was very slender.
Like no beard,
just the mustache.
That's really cool.
I think. Maybe he had a little goat at times. But yeah, and his wife was even smaller because they'd come to school events and she would dress just as flamboyantly as he did. Like they were just a match set. And he liked to teach, like when we talk about Russian culture, he knew how to do all the Russian dances. So we'd have to get up in class and like dance and waltz and do all this stuff. And they're like, please don't pick me to be your partner. Please don't pick. And then eventually all the girls were picked. So you're like, okay, this isn't awkward at all. Let's waltz. Sure. Around the classroom. But he was awful. His two favorite torture devices is he liked to put people on a stick. He'd suspend them on a stick and he'd grease it, and then he'd set you up on the stick with no pants on. And so eventually, like you'd clench and clench and clench and clench and clench, but eventually you couldn't clench anymore and you'd start sliding down onto the stick, basically impaling yourself like a corn dog. And he'd sit there and watch in a throne. The other one he liked to do is he'd like to tie your legs down, like apart, and he'd like tie ropes around them and stake them down so you couldn't move and couldn't run away. And then he took a sisal rope, which is that rope with all the little like strings that come off it. It looks kind of hairy and it kind of is prickly on your hands. You know what I'm talking about? And he'd have like this machine. It wasn't a machine, but like this contraption that made the rope go fast, back and forth, and it would be on the ground. It would be between your legs. And I wonder if he's dead. I should look up this teacher because I'll never forget his lecture, because you're like, oh my God, no, because he made it so real. And it would slowly but surely, as you're watching, rise up off the ground and head up towards your nether regions, and he'd keep it going until it sliced you in half. He'd do this for fun. Like, and those were just his two favorite torture devices, but he said he'd do whatever it took. Like, he brought the Inquisition, basically, the ideas of the Inquisition to Russia and used them against political adversaries and other things. It's quite the dude. So after having a leader like that, we needed somebody to come in and just kind of stop that behavior for a while. And so we bring in this 17-year-old dude pants named Michael. And his two successors, Alexei and Theodore II, they brought stability and modest bureaucratic centralization to Russia. Bring the government together, take it out of the hands of the nutballs like Ivan, and make it a little bit safer to be Russian in Russia. Thank goodness. If you ever want a good book, find a good biography of Ivan the Terrible. It would bring you some interesting reading on a Saturday night. So we have these two guys, Michael Romanov and his two successors. They bring stability, modest bureaucratic. However, the country was still very weak, militarily, weak, governmentally. They were poor. no money in the treasury, because nobody had run this country effectively for a very long time. So they're having to start from scratch here, but they have this huge population. They have very old nobles, not old like age nobles, but old families that have been in charge. So they're very comfortable where they are. They don't see the need for a centralized government because we've been doing fine all this time. Why would we do anything different? And so they have to fight against this old school mentality of the nobles who are happy leading their own little area and happy doing everything else. So we get this guy, a sickly, as it said, his brother was sickly. This guy, Peter, came to co-rule at 10 years old with his half-brother, Ivan V. Ivan V was a sickly little man cub, and he did not live very long. And Peter was able to take over. The guards of the Moscow garrison, the Streltsy, supported them, and they expected to be rewarded for that. But then nobody really knew who was in charge, because we got two boys in charge. One's got a bad cough, the other one is just 10, and their older sister, Sophia, is actually put in charge as regent. So everybody's like, well, who do we listen to? Boy number 1, boy number 2, or this girl? And nobody likes the girl. So we don't know what to do. So Peter's followers overthrew his sister in 1669. And he believed that he has to make himself an absolute ruler, centrally in charge, in order to protect not just himself, but the throne of Russia from the boyars and the Streltsy, the old nobility and the guards of the Moscow garrison. So what he does is he makes an example out of the naughty ones. He kills off some of the Streltsy, and he repressed and humiliated the boyars. There's no way to show that you're in charge by taking charge and being forceful. So he tames them, brings them under his control. They're not happy about it, but nobody wants to act out anymore either for fear of losing their head. So he is centrally in charge. This guy, Peter, is great. I think he's a great leader because he realizes what he has to do. He realizes the challenges that are ahead of him, even though he came into the game at age 10 and he had this issue right away. He had to increase the military power. So he just called up an army of 300,000 men, drafted 300,000 men to be part of the military. Because he's like, we cannot defend ourselves. We're too big. We need a sizable military. And you know what? You're going to stay in the military for a long time. This is not a one-year deal. We're going to train you and we're going to use you because we are going to expand and we're going to protect ourselves. The next thing he does is he's like, we have a lot of ocean front. Yes, it's iced in from October to May, but we have a lot of ocean front, and so we could be using that to the best of our advantage. So he built a great giant navy. Because if we're going to have these soldiers, we need to get them places. So he builds a navy on the Baltic Sea. He has, to the south, some warm water ports. Very important to Russia. They have to protect the warm water ports. Because if they go, if you're looking at my map here, they have a tiny little bit of, because this used to be Russia here, north of Poland, between Poland here, this blue, and Finland, the yellow. This used to be all of Russia prior to the split of communism. So they had this area, but that still gets iced in very early. And then they have all this waterway up here, but again, ice. So he's got to get into the Baltic here, he's got to get into the Black Sea, he's got to build a navy and ports on his warm water ports that eventually can weasel their way into the Mediterranean, through the Straits of Gibraltar, and into the Atlantic. So he plays up his advantages to the best of his ability. And then, once he does this, he goes off and he fights the Swedes to take over northern land. He's expanding his territory into control of Estonia, Livonia, and parts of Finland. So he's taking land slightly to the west of the Russian major cities. If you're going to be powerful, you have to show your power. You have to prove to the world that you deserve to be there. He gets it. And for that, he's considered a great Russian leader. So then, he also realizes that if you're going to be a powerful king, you got to look the part. People respect majesty to a point, especially at this time because we're still coming off the big effect of Louis XIV and the whole idea of the Sun King. So he builds himself a city, and he names it after himself, St. Petersburg. And in there he builds himself a capital, and he models it after Versailles. This big grandiose idea, yes.
Did he name it after a St. Peter's because his name was Peter, or did he make himself a saint?
No, he named it after the saint he was named after. So, he's also very afraid of anybody trying to take the throne away from him, including his son, Alexei, who's got issues. We're not really sure what was up with Alexei. History doesn't know. But they know that Alexei and Dad, Pete, don't get along at all. And so, and I like how they title this little section, The Case of Peter's Son Alexei, like, what was going on? Peter's son Alexei had been born to his first wife, whom he divorced. Peter was jealous of the young man, but even though the young man never had any skill, like he wasn't militarily brilliant where you're like, oh, he could take me over because he knows how to do that. He also was not ambitious at all. He was just a dude. Like, no offense, perpetual teenage dudes, but he was like a perpetual teenage dude. I'm good. Whatever, Dad. And so for some reason, Peter was jealous of Alexei and afraid that Alexei was going to try to take him over. And so Peter was becoming convinced that his opponents looked to Alexei as a focus for their possible sedition while Russia remained at war with Sweden. So he tries, Alexei, there was some truth to this, because Alexei later on went to Vienna where he attempted to enter into a conspiracy, a vague conspiracy, so nobody really knows what was going on in this deal, with the Habsburg Emperor Charles VI. Well, he comes back to Russia, and Dad's like, what were you doing there in Vienna? He's like, nothing, Dad, I didn't do anything. What were you doing in Vienna? Dad, nothing. Were you talking to Charles? A little, because I was there, and I'm the prince, and he's the leader, and why wouldn't I talk to him? Because it's important to talk to him. And so, Peter, meanwhile, is picking up other people who are being corrupt in his government, and he's like, maybe they're all going to circle around my son and like use him as a rallying point and make him the poster child of this. And so they'll pit son against Dad, and then we're going to have this family fight, and it's going to break into a civil war, and then I'm going to be deposed. It's getting a little light in the loafers here in his head. And so he finds out that Alexei and Charles do have a conspiracy with some churchmen, maybe some nobles, maybe some officials. And so during this, Peter questions Alexei himself, tortures him himself eventually, and he condemns him to death. Alexei is left to lay in a jail somewhere, and all of a sudden, Alexei is dead. And everybody's like, well, how did he die? I don't know. Nobody knows. So now the history's mysteries is, did Peter kill his son? Did Peter order his son killed in the end to make him so that he doesn't become a rallying point and the center force against dethroning his dad? If you are willing to kill your son in order to make sure that you stay on the throne, you are a very scary dude. Very scary dude. So now nobody wants to cross him. If he's willing to kill his own son, then who knows what else he's going to be willing to do. This is a picture of St. Petersburg on the Gulf of Finland. He builds it nice and close to the border and on the water so that he can easily move around, so that Europe can easily come to him in St. Petersburg, so they're not crossing against, this big Russian winter, that he's close by. And he moved the capital there from Moscow in 1712. So this is kind of what the city looks like in this portrait of the city in the 18th century. So in his later years, he realizes that there's a lot of threat to him, and he knows that it's coming from the nobility and the Orthodox Church, and so he makes his enemies his friends. Because if they're close to you, you can keep a better tabs on this. This is the same thing that Louis XIV did. He brings the church closely under the authority of persons loyal to him. He undertook radical administrative reforms to bring the nobility under control. He's just taking everything in to make sure that he is in control. And then he publishes the Table of Ranks. And the Table of Ranks made a person's social position and privileges more important than lineage. Who cares who your dad and your grandpa were? What are you doing for me now? That's what's going to make you important. Not where you come from, not how old you are, not how old your family is, but what are you doing for me now? He also, and it's not talked about in our book, he makes his men look more Western. He forces men to cut off their beards to make them look like French, look like Germans, look like Spanish. He also makes them change their clothing choices when they're around court to dress in the Western style, not the traditional Russian style. So he changes the culture around him as well to make them more competitive on the European market. Also, he is reforming the church. He brings the church under secular control or under government control. And by doing that, he abolishes the patriarch, which is kind of like the Pope of the Russian Orthodox Church. He gets rid of that leadership and puts in its place the Holy Synod, which is several bishops to control instead of just one person. That way he can have control over the group and make it safer for him that way. However, he leaves no successor because he kills his son, Alexei. So now there's nobody to take over for him. He had not settled on a successor. When he dies, there's no clear line of succession. However, Peter had laid the foundations of a modern Russia, but not the foundations of a stable state. So he's coming into this, he's not looking at how to make them stable, he's looking at how to make them modern. And those two things do not go hand in hand. It doesn't matter how outdated you are, but if your government is stable and your finances are strong and your military is good, then your traditions can be outdated. He brought the traditions up to date, but he did not stabilize the country. And he leaves no heir. Yes?
Why did the Romanov names stay in Russia?
Because a distant relation takes over of the family. And that's the Russians. And that's absolute monarchy. How do we build, and this is a time of just building in Europe. How do we build Europe to be strong? How do we build Europe to be in charge? Yes?
What's the test going to be on? Like the different people or like what they did?
Both. So let's fill out our form on Russia, on Peter, and on Frederick and Maria Theresa. And before we take our quiz tomorrow, we will talk through all of them. Okay? So let's work on our charts so that tomorrow we can discuss them before the quiz and after.